Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Between Sessions with Berries. I have a really fantastic guest today, Emily Guarnotta. Emily, so glad to have you here. I want to give you guys a little intro before we dive into it. Emily is a licensed psychologist and certified perinatal mental health provider. She owns Phoenix Health, where she supports parents through the emotional up and downs of parenthood. Her favorite topic, guiding therapists who are about to become parents themselves. Emily, welcome. So glad to have you here.
I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. So what drew you to specialize in maternal mental health, and how did your own transition into parenthood influence the work that you were doing or even getting into that field?
My own journey into maternal mental health was really personal. So when I had my first child a little over 7 years ago, I was working as a psychologist at the time. I wasn't working in the perinatal space, but I was working with more general anxiety and depressive disorders. And I experienced my own bout of postpartum depression after I had her. And the whole experience was just very eye-opening. I was very naive and kind of thinking that I was a mental health professional, so I was going to go into motherhood and some way that my profession was going to buffer me from experiencing any kind of mental health concerns related to that transition. Wow. So I was really kind of shocked when I went through that myself. And I really didn't understand it because maternal mental health, perinatal mental health is like one day in graduate school, it's covered.
Yeah.
So it's not something that we're really taught unless you're specifically seeking out that training. So the whole experience just really opened my eyes, and I wanted to learn more about it, get training, re-specialize. And then that's really been my journey ever since, is supporting parents and being there for them during these tough transitions.
Yeah. It's such an important topic, and you're right. I'm not a parent, but on the periphery, I hear people talking about going through the postpartum and all that stuff. And I bet it does really throw you for a loop being a therapist, just thinking, oh, I've got this. It's fine. I know a little bit about it. I'll be able to pull myself out and it'll be fine. But it is a biochemical thing that happens, I guess, hormonally. I don't even know a lot about it. Hormonally after you have a child. And I would imagine you're planning for 6 weeks of maternity leave or something, and then all of a sudden it's like, wow, this is turning into 8, 10, 12 weeks, or I don't even know. I would imagine it happens to a lot of therapists that have children.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a combination of the biological changes that you mentioned, hormonal, sleep deprivation, support. If you don't have really a good support system in place, or you have a lot of other stressors, and that can also impact your experience. So it's something that you can plan for, or you can try to predict, but you can still experience it even under the best of conditions.
I'm sure. Oh my gosh, I really want to dive into this topic. It's so important. So before you had kids, what did your practice look like? And then after you had kids, what did your practice look like? Like, what is the difference now when you're looking back on it in hindsight? How different was it for you? Or was it different? I don't even know.
Changed a lot. Yeah. Before I had kids, I was working a lot. So I was working full-time in community mental health, and I was working at a private practice on the weekends. And when I got pregnant, I transitioned out of working for a private practice and started taking steps to create my own private practice. But it was a very slow transition, like a couple hours a week at that point. And then as I was getting closer to giving birth to my daughter, I kind of had a little bit of a crisis, and I said, how am I going to be able to work at the same pace after I have a baby? So I ended up cutting back some of my hours at the community mental health clinic and adding some of those hours back into my own practice, where I had a lot more flexibility. And that was kind of the transition. Over the course of about 5 years, I would cut back from my full-time job, which became part-time, and then less than part-time, and I would cut back and add it to my private practice until I was fully in my own private practice. My older daughter was probably 3 or 4 at that time.
That's tough. I couldn't imagine. I mean, I did it myself, obviously going from a group to my own private practice, but it was so easy for me because I could just weekends, evenings, whatever, just whenever I could fit people in. And I know it's got to just change everything when you've got a baby in the mix, for sure.
Yeah, for me, really the slow, organic transition is what worked. I know some people will kind of cold turkey it, and I think it's good to know that there are different ways that you can approach that transition.
So what I would imagine is that a lot of private practice owners, if they're going to take maternity leave or parental leave or whatever, the phrases for now. I don't even know what we call it anymore. Is it maternity leave? If they're going to do that, I imagine that they worry about that continuity of care. Like I've got to take off 6 weeks, 8 weeks, that sort of thing. So what are the biggest challenges you see clinicians facing in that transition period there?
Yeah, I love that you're asking about this because this is something that I feel like isn't talked about enough, especially when you own your own business, how parental leave looks like is very challenging. So I would say some of the challenges that I've experienced or I've seen other therapists experience is finding someone to cover your caseload if you have clients that
Yeah.
are going to need that care. And you can't always predict how long your parental leave is going to be. You might go into it saying, I'm going to take 8 weeks off, 12 weeks off, whatever it is. But sometimes there are circumstances that are beyond your control. You have a baby in the NICU or you have a
Gosh.
complication and you need more time. So I really encourage therapists in practice to convey to their clients that this isn't set in stone so that they're aware if there is a change, if you're telling them you'll be back in 8 weeks and you have to extend that, that they're aware of that and that there's always someone, even if they say that they don't want to see someone in the interim, they know that there is a fallback person that they can reach
Oh,
out to because it's very stressful when you're on your parental leave and adjusting to parenthood and then you get an emergency message from a client who needs to be seen or needs a resource at that point, and you might not be in the headspace to be able to focus on that. So I really recommend having a point person, even if your clients tell you that they don't want to see someone else, just someone that they could reach out to if they need extra support.
so how do you find that point person? Like, it would be hard, I think, as the receiving clinician, like, oh, yeah, I'll just take on your entire caseload for 6 weeks, no big deal. I can fit them in, that kind of thing. So, do you have a team of people you go to for this? Or if you're like in a practice, do you go to the clinician and say, I need to disperse amongst you? Like, what is the game plan for that?
I think if you're in a group practice and you have that option to disperse your clients amongst the practice so it's not a burden on any one clinician, that's great. I didn't have that. I was in solo practice at that time that I had each of my kids. So I tapped into my network of friends who are therapists and said, do you have any bandwidth to take on one client or two clients? I was able to kind of piece together options for different people. I did find for me personally, a lot of my clients, they're pretty high functioning. They didn't want to see someone else. But again, I still had someone that I said, if you change your mind, this is a person that you can reach out to. Because I knew if I was getting those messages when I was out on parental leave, I wasn't going to be in a headspace to be able to show up for them in the way that I would have liked to.
Is there like a standard? I'm saying 6 weeks. I don't even know. Is it 6 weeks? Is it 8 weeks? What's the expected time that a person should decide to take off if they're going to have a baby? What would you say would be the average?
I think it's what you feel is best for you. I think there's no right or wrong. Everyone's different. Everyone's situation's different, has different levels of support. So it really varies. Some people 10 to 12 weeks is probably maybe the average, but I even say that cautiously because I think you really have to do what feels right for you. And again, have that flexibility of knowing if you're not in a space to go back, it is okay to extend.
I want to talk about that because I feel like as therapists, as you alluded to in the beginning, like you thought you'd have it handled even if you had some postpartum come up and that sort of thing. I would imagine, does the imposter syndrome start to creep in a little bit? If you're like, oh my gosh, I can't get back. Am I a terrible therapist? I feel like that could be a spiral for people, especially if they're already in this depressive place because of everything going on hormonally and everything. So what, does that happen? Do you see that?
I experienced it firsthand. I've heard of other therapists experiencing it. I've seen it show up or experienced it showing up as a fear. What if none of my clients come back after I come back from maternity leave? What if I come back and I have no clients and then I have to start over? Those fears actually came up a lot for me when I was out on both of my maternity leaves. I think I would be in a much different place now if I was to have another baby. But at the time, I was also earlier in my private practice career. So I think I was already kind of primed for some imposter syndrome. But another thing that comes up a lot is when you first do go back to work, often you're not sleeping very much. You're still hormonally adapting. There's just so many changes. So it's really common to feel pretty foggy and not like yourself and just not very sharp. regardless of whatever job you have. I know this is an extremely common feeling. So it feels like you're starting over again, like you're a first time in your internship. And I know I experienced a lot of those imposter thoughts of like, am I a good therapist? I'm exhausted. I think I'm not showing up in the best way. But that's very normal. So I tell like my friends that are going through it that these feelings are valid. These feelings are normal. You will feel good again. You will get back your mojo. It's going to take a little bit of time, but it probably feels one way to you and looks very different to the outside. Just remember that it might feel like much more intense to you than it's actually looking to other people.
Absolutely. That's such good advice. So, what was the experience for you, right? Maybe after the first child and then the second child, you went, you came back. I would imagine over time you're like, oh, it's actually fine. I didn't lose my mojo, like you said, or nobody noticed or that sort of thing. So just what was it like for you? How long did you feel like it took you to get back in the swing of things and accept that, okay, I've got a foggy brain for a little bit, or I might just be sleep deprived? How did that happen for you, like over time, just in case people listening are like, when does it get better? I want to know. What's the stages?
Yeah, I wish I could give an answer. I honestly think it's like an evolution. Like for me, it probably took, I even cringe saying this because I don't want to scare people, but probably 2 years to really feel like, okay, I have my bearings again. That's not to say it was really challenging that entire 2 years, but it did probably take 2 years to feel like I had my foundation again. So it does get better and it takes time. It just kind of takes flexibility. And I made a ton of mistakes in my parental leave journeys. I went back to work way too soon. Like I would say it takes time, but you can get there.
So, what do you think you did wrong? I'd just love to ask those questions for people so they can learn from your mistakes instead of having to do them on their own. What do you think were some of the big ones that happened for you?
I think I went back way too soon before I was ready to. And I think a lot of therapists can relate to this. A lot of us have that people pleasing tendency part of ourselves, and that can really become activated when you're going through something like this. So I felt this urgency to go back for my client's sake, even though I really wasn't ready and could have used more time. So if I was to do it over again, I would have taken more time. And I would also continue to vocalize to folks that maybe didn't want to see another provider that there are these options if they change their minds, and just work on that feeling for myself to know, okay, they're making the choice to not see someone else, but they have this resource. So this doesn't mean that I have to run back when they do have these options.
I gotcha. So, was it like a plan for 8 weeks? My clients thought it was going to be 8 weeks. And I'd love to talk about that too, like the language around what do you say to them and to prepare them, and then as it's coming and all of that. But also, if you get to that place where it's like, all right, I told everybody 8 weeks, they're expecting me to be back like on Monday, and there's no way I'm ready to go back. Like, what do I do? Do I have my admin call and tell them? Do I call and have a conversation with each one? I just would love to talk about the language around the whole thing. Like when you first find out you're pregnant, then it's like, okay, I'm definitely gonna have to take leave. Like, how far do you tell them in advance? What do you say? And then through that transition period, if you're not ready to go back, how do you handle that part of it? Can we kind of talk through that journey for somebody that's listening?
I love that question. So I want to start off by saying I don't think there's any rights and wrongs. I'll just share what I did. And I was lucky to have a lot of support from other psychologists and therapists around. So I had a lot of feedback, a lot of suggestions on how to handle this, which was really helpful. So I definitely encourage you to talk to your colleagues too and get consultation on this. I personally started telling my clients probably when I knew I had about 3 to 4 months to work with them on it, because I always tend to work with people pretty long term. I would inform them of what the plan was. Again, also letting them know, conveying that this is my plan, but I can only control so much of it. So there is a world where things might change. So I want them to be very aware of that. And then I would work with each of them over the course of that time. Let's talk about what we think might be best for you during that time. Kind of get their thoughts on it, share my clinical recommendation as far as whether they really should be seen by another provider regularly during that time, or maybe have a check-in person if they need it. And then I would create a plan for each client, and I would help connect them with that provider if they were going to be seen. So whether that's like having that person join a session with us or providing some kind of a warm introduction so they felt comfortable with that person. And we would just keep talking about it and processing it as that time got closer. I do tend to work pretty relationally. So, also talking about their reactions to hearing this news, which can really vary widely. Sometimes it can bring up things for folks, especially in working in the perinatal world. I think my most challenging was when I worked with infertility clients struggling to get pregnant. Having to disclose a pregnancy is really challenging and needs to be done really sensitively. But it's a conversation we're really having for ideally 3 to 4 months so that they're prepared, empowered, they have a plan of action, and they know the provider that's going to be covering their care.
So you're having that conversation up front. That sounds like such a great system to get them sort of onboarded. And then are you checking in at all at that time you're off? Or is it like, I'm just trusting that this thing I put in place is working? Because I know me, like I'm such a micromanager. And like you said, the imposter syndrome, the people pleasing, all that, like I'd want to make sure they were okay kind of thing, even though I know probably they're fine. They lived without me before, they can live with me after. But are you checking in or are you just trying to like not do that part of the process like for you?
Yeah, you're really letting go and knowing that that provider is their point person. You're taking on their care. And ideally, you're selecting providers that you trust, that you hopefully have some sort of a relationship with, and you know how they work, so you can trust that you know that they're in good hands.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So then that third part of that huge question is, okay, I told you 8 and now it's going to be 10 weeks or maybe longer. I don't even know if I'm coming back. How do you handle that? What's the language? What do you talk to them about? How do you continue that process?
Yeah, that's not a situation I personally found myself in, but if I were to be in a situation like that, I would want to inform the client as soon as I knew that I was going to be extending my leave. And I think, kind of depending on how you run your practice, if you typically have an admin person communicate, in an ideal world, you'd be that one communicating, but sometimes there are factors that are beyond our control that might make it challenging for you to do that. As long as that's getting communicated to your clients and that they're being given resources for care, that's obviously very important, is that they have their care covered and that they're not just left in the lurch. I'm a self-diagnosed people pleaser. I know this is really difficult, but you have to make the decision that is best for you and your family, because if you're showing up before you're ready to, you're not going to be the best version of yourself as a therapist or the therapist that they need. So I do truly believe, even though they might be upset or disappointed or hurt, you want to give them a good referral, a provider that they can process that all with. But that shouldn't be why you go back when you're not ready.
Yeah. And you even alluded to it before that you went back too early. Looking back on it, what do you think the signs were that it was too early? What do you think was happening then that maybe somebody else could maybe know this little checklist? It might be too early if, you have this, and this going on kind of thing.
I think when you're feeling like you're still in survival mode, you should not be going.
Okay.
I mean, it might feel like survival mode for a while, but when you're truly in survival mode, when you're not sleeping, when it's hard to take care of your basic needs, you should not be returning back to work. And when you find that you're feeling very anxious or very down, and it's happening often, most days, nearly all day, you might be experiencing a mental health condition yourself. So you definitely want to make sure that you get the care and the support that you need before you go out there to care and support others.
That's such a good point. Yeah, survival mode. Again, I've never been a mother, but, my stepdaughter just had a baby like 2 weeks ago, and I just see her face. She's so tired. I just couldn't imagine, like, baby's sleep schedule being off and your sleep schedule, and just must be really exhausting. And then trying to come back and care for so many clients at once, it's got to be just quite overwhelming, I would think.
Yeah, I think there are so many more resources now than back when I was doing it, even though it wasn't even that long ago. But I think we're having more of these conversations now, that there are actually coaches that'll help guide you through this. Obviously, just more resources to communicate with other providers so you can set up care plans. So just use those resources or consultation groups to help with the imposter syndrome, supervision, your own therapy. Use those resources because it is a really tough transition. And I don't know anyone that just bounces right back as a therapist. So it does take time and you need to support yourself.
Kind of jumping around a little bit, but how do you manage when you do go back? I'm sure it's individualized to everybody depending on your support and all of that. What plan do you put in place? Is it like, okay, baby needs to transition to daycare or whatever, childcare. And do you wait to make sure the transition is going to be okay? Do you just like trust, like baby goes here first day, I go back to work first day? Like, do you have any tips around how to manage that transition period with getting the child placed in a different structure?
Yeah, it's really challenging because I think everyone's situation's different. I think in an ideal world, you might have a little bit of time where you're still at home and you can make sure that they're acclimated to childcare, who's ever going to be watching them. But I know that that's not always the case. But finding a childcare provider that you really trust is critical. And I know that trust takes time to build, so you might not feel it on day one, but you know the feeling when someone's not a right fit and where someone could be a right fit. You just need to build that trust. So just choosing providers that give you that feeling that you can have that potential to grow a really good relationship with them, or that your baby can. I think just leaning into what you need. If you need a couple of days where you can see that baby's doing good with their provider before you go back to work, you should by all means do that.
That's amazing. This is so helpful. I really think people listening are going to have a lot of help. So, it's called Between Sessions with Berries because we often talk about like what can we do to support ourselves between sessions to make our lives easier, that kind of thing. And a lot of times we talk about tech or systems or things that we put in place that can make our lives easier between sessions, if it's like an AI note taker or some other system that's really working well for you. Do you have anything like that that's working in your life, or maybe that you were using during that transition period that kind of made it more systemized or easier for you to do all of this?
During that journey, tapping into anything that made my life easier. That was around the time that I started using an EHR. For example, I was doing paper notes for a while. That was a game changer to save time. Telehealth became an option. I had my second child during COVID, so we were doing telehealth. That made life so much easier. In terms of like things to make myself feel better, self-care stuff, I'm a big fan of mindfulness apps and meditation and things that you can do in between sessions or at the start of your day to kind of just calm down. Because as a parent, then you're having two shifts. You have the parenting shift, and then you have the therapy shift, and then you're going back to the parenting shift. And it's a lot of transitions. So honestly, like throwing on a mindfulness or meditation app in between one of those transitions was a game changer for me.
Yeah, love that. Love it, love it. And I imagine when you're back too, there's decisions around the type of client you have. If you're already working with this type of population, these clients, you're probably making decisions around, do I share about my journey? Do I share about the postpartum? Do I not share if there's infertility issues, that sort of thing? I guess you're making that decision on each client, but do you talk about your own personal journey, like self-disclosure with maybe parents or new parents that are going through some similar things that you're working with?
My personal style is to use self-disclosure in a very limited way. So I frequently don't self-disclose unless I really feel like it's important in that moment and it would be helpful for the client to hear it. But I think my clients kind of pick up on the fact that I have that experience. And usually at some point they figure out that I'm a parent if they don't ask directly. Or I think a lot of them assume, they just get that vibe. But personally, I'm not a big self-disclosure, but I think in some cases it can be helpful.
So using it therapeutically and with good clinical judgment, that sort of thing. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you kind of talked about the self-care routine, your meditation apps. Do you have a particular app that you love to go to, or a particular meditation session that's always the one for you to go to that you could recommend?
Honestly, I'm a huge fan of the free meditation videos on YouTube.
I love those.
Yeah, I love just searching for whatever it is I'm feeling that day, like a calming meditation, a healing meditation, an intrusive thoughts meditation. There's just so much. So I'll just throw in a description in the search bar and do whatever pops up.
Love that. Yeah, I'm like the worst sleeper. So sometimes I'll go to YouTube and they've got these 8-hour sleep binaural things on there. I don't know if you ever put those on, but they're like a miracle. It's like, wow, this is going to play literally all night. And it's just like free through YouTube. So I love that tip. That's fantastic. So these are like lightning questions we like to ask towards the end of the podcast. What's the best parenting advice you think you've ever received through this journey that you've been on to becoming a parent?
The best parenting advice, I think it's just to keep growing and keep learning and just know you're never going to have it all figured out, but just keep trying and be really flexible. I didn't grow up with a lot of flexibility, so that's something that I try to incorporate a lot with my kids.
And what does your day-to-day look like right now? That's just came into my mind. How do you structure your hours and the kids and all of that stuff? What's your sort of recipe for that? In case somebody's like, I don't even know how to structure this stuff. Like take them to daycare. Do you have family watching? How do you manage that? How many hours do you see clients? Like all that stuff.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a mishmash mess right now because I'm working a lot more on the admin side of my business. I do still see clients, but kind of setting the stage to be able to do even more admin work. So it's a little bit of just squeezing people in when I can. I try to work about 9 to 5, but sometimes I'll do things in the evenings or on the weekends. I try not to see clients in the evenings or the weekends at this stage. My kids are in school or camp, so they're not home during the day, which allows me to just focus so that when they do come home, I can then give them all of my attention.
Nice. I love that. And I'm assuming all telehealth now, or?
I am all telehealth.
Okay, yeah. Gotcha. That's awesome. I feel like that gives so much more flexibility. Amazing. So do you help other clinicians navigate this journey? Is that part of what you do? Do you do coaching for that, or?
I don't do coaching at this point, but I'm always up to just, as a friend, as a fellow provider, offer some tips. I've made so many mistakes along the way that I'm happy to share and hope that other people can learn from my experience and all the hindsight that I have.
What an amazing resource. Thank you for sharing today. And how do people find you? If there's a therapist mom that's getting ready to have a baby, how would she find you if she wanted to reach out and talk to you?
Yeah, my website is joinphoenixhealth.com, and that's also our Instagram handle. So feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here today. This is such an important topic. I don't hear a lot of people talking about it either, so I really appreciate you coming. Yeah.
Thanks for having me.